Ladies and gentlemen, if you could please find your seat. Good afternoon. I'm Jim Knotts, and on behalf of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund, I'd like to welcome you all to our annual Memorial Day observance at the Wall to honor and remember those who gave their all for our country. Before we begin, I'd like to give my personal thanks to the Yellow Hat volunteers. You can see them around. They're the National Park Service volunteers, and there is almost always at least one of them here. They are the face of the memorial to the 5.6 million people who visit here every year, and we couldn't do what we do here at the Wall without their assistance. And I would also like to thank the staff of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund for the work that they do all year. I'd also like to thank our sponsors who make ceremonies like today possible. Public Broadcasting System, Alan Buckaloo, William Murdy, PenFed Credit Union, Land of the Free Foundation, USAA, and Wells Fargo. Memorial Day is about remembering those, thank you, yes, let's give them a round of applause. We really appreciate our sponsors. Memorial Day is about remembering those who made the ultimate sacrifice and our promise to never forget them. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund remains committed to keeping that promise. There are many Gold Star family members with us today, and we thank them for joining us. The care and preservation of the memorial site is part of VVMF's core mission. Each year, the Department of Defense directs VVMF to add names and make status changes on the wall. This year, 3 names were added, which brings the total number of names on the wall to 58,318. Today, we are joined by friends and family of the service members whose names were recently added to the wall. And we're going to give them a chance to spend a moment with their loved ones at the wall. Escorting the family of U.S. Marine Corps Corporal McGuire is the 18th Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps, Ronald Green. Sergeant Major, if you would escort the family to the wall. Escorting the family of U.S. Army Sergeant Wilmers is Major General Garrett Yee. General Yee. Escorting the family of U.S. Army Sergeant Whitson is Brigadier General Ron Place. While they have a moment at the wall, other heroes are also not with us today. They are our nation's missing in action. To my right is an empty chair placed here as a symbol of the 1,600 Americans still unaccounted for from the Vietnam War. In 2016, 5 service members were accounted for, and today we are joined by their friends and family, and I will read the names of those accounted in 2016. Alan L. Lawyer, William E. Campbell, Frederick P. Crosby, Dean A. Klenda, Patrick H. Wood, and now I will read the names of those added to the wall this year for the first time in this place that our nation has set aside to honor our Vietnam veterans. Kenneth R. McGuire, Edward L. Wilmers, John T. Whitson. For those of us who have served, we know that our service and our units have unique traditions, And that lone here that you just heard harkens to the Aggie tradition to show that Sergeant Whitson is here in spirit. It is now my honor to introduce our chaplain to provide today's invocation, Lieutenant Colonel Tammy Cruz.
Let us pray. Today, gracious Lord, we celebrate and honor Americans' own, who in their patriotism have given the ultimate sacrifice of their lives in love of country and their fellow comrades at arms. Lord, we are reminded that this memorial points us to Washington and to Lincoln, to the father of our nation and to the preserver of our nation. And between them, we honor those who took up the struggle for liberty and justice, freedom and peace in Southeast Asia in the 20th century. We are reminded of those voices now silent, who rest from their labors in sacred fields of honor throughout this land and on foreign soil, particularly of those with whom we have served. Especially we hold sacred the memories of those who gave their lives in Vietnam and in Southeast Asia. We honor too those who remain missing, whose fate we do not know. We would be amiss if we failed to forget the families of our fallen comrades who have equally sacrificed by giving up their fathers, mothers, brothers, sisters, children. Forgive us as a country when we failed to respect those who gave so sacrificially in this war. We pause in a moment of silence to remember the fallen, whose names are recorded on the sacred wall in front of us, and those who suffered or later died as a result of their injuries. They shall not grow old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. Their deeds, their stories, their collective history is but a prologue of what is and the greatness of what is yet to be in the lives and deeds of all who stand on this sacred ground today. I pray, gracious God, that as we see our own reflection mirrored back to us, as we read the names of those who gave all their tomorrows, that we might have our days, that we might live all of our todays worthy of their sacrifice. Help us to ever be mindful of those who are this day serving in harm's way. We ask your blessings upon them today. Make us all leaders for peace in our day. Let freedom ring. Amen.
Thank you, Chaplain Cruz. And now I'd like to introduce today's special guest, Master of Ceremonies. Jan Scruggs, the founder and President Emeritus of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund, is a native of Washington, born here in 1950. He now lives in Annapolis. He serves as a member of the Vietnam War Commemoration Committee for the Department of Defense. He was appointed chairman of the Selective Service National Appeals Board by President Obama. And this is the board that will be activated in the event of ongoing American military casualties requiring conscription. Jan is a lawyer and a member of the DC Bar. He has written for the New York Times, Vietnam Magazine, The Hill Magazine, and Military Times in recent months. While he enjoys semi-retirement in Annapolis, he continues to be involved as an advisor to organizations seeking advice for memorials. Jan. Hey, anybody out there remember me? Yes, well, thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today. To get the ceremony started, I would like to introduce the 3rd Infantry Regiment, United States Army, also known as the Old Guard. And ladies and gentlemen, please stand for the presentation of the colors if you are able to stand. Sergeant, please post the colors. is led by Staff Sergeant William Stanley, United States Army. Retire the colors. I want to note that the person who sang our national anthem is the Staff Sergeant Matthew Smith, and he did an excellent job. We really appreciate it. Please be seated. So each year we hold this ceremony in partnership with the National Park Service. So this is land of the National Park Service. Please welcome Ms. Gay Vietzky, Superintendent of the National Mall here and Memorial Parks.
Thank you, Jan. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Gay Vietzky. I have the honor to serve as the superintendent here of the National Mall and Memorial Parks. And on behalf of our staff, our volunteers, I bring you a warm welcome to veterans, family members and friends, honored guests. Welcome to the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. This memorial, which was conceived and built on behalf of a grateful nation to honor and to recognize more than 3 million Americans, men and women, who served in the Vietnam War. I'd like to offer a special welcome to the veterans and their families specifically. Thank you for being with us here today on this very special day. I'm humbled to spend the day with you. Jan, it's also a real privilege and an honor to have you with us this year. And I want to extend a very special thank you to you and to Jim and the magnificent partners we have in the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund. This organization is essential to helping us care for and extend the legacy of this very special place of remembrance of fallen heroes. So thank you. This memorial, as with our other monuments and memorials, promotes the spirit of unity and remembrance, giving us all a way to recognize those who served and those who continue to serve our great nation, and reminding all Americans of our common heritage. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial is a place where everyone, regardless of your opinions, can come together and honor those who served. This memorial has paved the way towards reconciliation and healing from a divisive conflict and time in our nation's history, a process that continues today. This place provides us with an opportunity to explore the lessons of the past, to probe questions that people continue to ask about war, loss, survival, and the fundamental reasons behind why we fight. And therein, I believe, lies the relevance of history and the power of our nation's sacred memorials. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial is not merely a granite and marble wall, a list of over 58,000 names of heroic men and women who fought, struggled, and made the supreme sacrifice for their country. This place allows all visitors, both young and old, the opportunity to find meaning and understanding of a war, as well as its significance and relevance to us in the 21st century. It and the other memorials along the National Mall help tell the vast history of our nation and its incredible narrative of people, of our people. These memorials remind us that extraordinary things can come from people with otherwise ordinary lives, and they help us understand the monumental trials and sacrifices that have shaped our nation, our government, and our society. We at the National Park Service are honored to be entrusted with the care of places like this, to welcome millions of visitors who come here each year. I send out a special thank you to the men and women in green and gray who are among you, and to our volunteers in yellow. Thank you for helping me take care of this place. You are the most remarkable staff. So again, thank you for being with us. It's our honor to care for the Vietnam Veterans Memorial and the Vietnam Women's Memorial, which recognizes the 265,000 women, all volunteers, who served during the war. And I can promise you, I can promise you that we of the National Park Service will be here every day of every year watching over this place, keeping it and protecting it, and passing along the stories of heroism and sacrifice to future generations of Americans. For it is not simply a memorial that we preserve here. It is our birthright as a nation, purchased at an unimaginable cost, and one that we care for with all the reverence it demands. Thank you.
Thank you, Gay. I would like to note to everyone that with us standing today is former Secretary of Defense and Senator Chuck Hagel. And I just want to note that back in 1993, we had kind of run out of money. So I went to Chuck and said, you know, we need a few $1 million so that we can put in an investment account so to always take care of the memorial. If there's some broken stones, with an insurance policy on it, we got some. So over the years, he and a guy named Tom Ridge, you remember Tom Ridge, the first Secretary of Homeland Security, great guy, former governor, they put together a little deal in Congress, a commemorative coin. They got us $2.5 million. We spent about $1.5 million, but we still, because of investing your dividends, we still have $2.5 million to take care of the wall. So thank you, Chuck. Finally. I would now like to introduce Julie Kink. She will speak on behalf of the Vietnam Women's Memorial. Julie is a Gold Star sister. Her brother, warrant officer David Kink, was a Vietnam helicopter pilot when he gave his life in 1969 at age 19. 25 years later, Julie began searching for her brother's fellow pilots to learn more about him, and eventually she not only learned how he died, but more importantly, how he lived. So at this time, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Julie Kink.
I'm honored to be here on our National Day of Remembrance. I'm Julie Kink. My brother, David Kink, was a helicopter pilot with C Troop, 1st of the 9th Cav. His name is on panel 20 West. David lost his life after 1 month in Vietnam when the light observation helicopter he was flying crashed due to a ground explosion. He was 19 years old, and I was 8. I barely knew him. The lanky, gentle big brother that I said goodbye to at a Madison, Wisconsin airport in 1969 would be 67 years old today. I've seen 17,000 more sunsets than he had a chance to see. My fellow Gold Star families, please raise your hand for a moment. This long black wall, with its accompanying statues of the 3 servicemen, the Vietnam women there caring for their soldier brothers, the education center to be built, documentaries by our national storytellers, Ken Burns and Lynn Novick. All these things ensure that America will never, ever forget. Unfortunately, there was a time when the Vietnam War was the last thing we as a nation wanted to remember. Our televisions brought the battles and the bombing into our living rooms. But for those of us who lost someone over there, like many of the veterans who returned, there was an unwritten rule. You cannot talk about the war. Not here, not now. I want to tell you today that it's okay to talk about Vietnam. It took me 25 years to feel comfortable enough to search for veterans who had served with my brother so that I could learn about his last days. I was afraid to stir up painful memories, afraid my questions would be unwelcome. Believe me, you guys aren't always easy to find. Eventually, I found men who trained and flew with David, who helped me learn not only how he died, but more importantly, how he lived. I don't use the word closure because for me, the subject was closed for 26 years. I like the word closer. Finding his friends has brought me closer to my brother. To my beloved Vietnam brothers who are here today, I know that you carry the memory of your buddies in your hearts every day of your lives. Thank you for showing us Gold Star families who our loved ones might have become had they had a chance to grow up and grow old like we have all done in their absence. To the courageous Vietnam women who are here today, you are my heroes. More than 265,000 of you served our country during the Vietnam War. 11,000 of you went to Vietnam. In the fog of war and death, you became a sister, a friend, a mother. How do you look into the eyes of a dying soldier and make the pain of the war disappear for a while? You did it somehow. And when you came home, like your Vietnam brothers, many of you never told your friends or family members about your tour of duty. I want to thank my friend Diane Evans for establishing the Vietnam Women's Memorial, not only to honor women who served, but also so that we families of the fallen would know about the women who gave care, comfort, and a human touch to our loved ones who were suffering and dying. In his last letter home, my brother wrote, "You're never alone on a mission. There's always somebody to protect you and get you out even before you hit the ground." It gives me great peace to know that even at 19 years old, even after just a month in country, David knew he wasn't alone. He got it. And now through the love of my Vietnam brothers and sisters, I get it too. You're never alone on a mission. Every name on that wall had a family, and their families are us. Thank you and welcome home.
Thank you. Fantastic. Fantastic. There's a famous jurist, Oliver Wendell Holmes, and after the Civil War, there was something called Decoration Day, which eventually became Memorial Day. But these are words that he wrote. He wrote, and this is about us. Our generation has been set apart by our experience. In our youth, our hearts were touched with fire. It was given to us to learn that life is a profound and personal thing. Every year, there comes a pause in spring, Memorial Day, when we hear the pipes of death. We have seen the best and the most noble of our generations give their lives in battle. Yet I think, he said, I think I see banners of a column. Our dead friends still live for us. They bid us to think of life, not death. Life, to which they lent their passion in their youth. As I listen, I hear the chorus of life and joy. Once again, our trumpets sound a note of daring, hope, and will. I had to read that because I became a great fan of Ken Burns when I saw the Civil War, and Lynn Novick, and I've watched everything they've ever done. They have to leave a little bit early today because they're the grand marshals of the parade. I think it's fantastic. So Ken has been making documentary films for almost 40 years. His first Academy Award was Brooklyn Bridge in 1981, and he's gone on to direct and produce some of the most acclaimed historical documentaries ever seen and very well watched, including baseball, the war. He's been honored with many major awards, Oscar nominations, etc. Lynn Novick is an Emmy and Peabody Award-winning documentary filmmaker for over 3 decades. She's been producing and directing films about American history and culture, and among them are some of the most acclaimed and top-rated documentaries to have aired on PBS. Her films include Prohibition, Baseball, Jazz, Frank Lloyd Wright, The War, the great one about the World War II. Well, Ken and Lynn have worked on their film, The Vietnam War, for 10 years, and this 18-hour documentary film series begins September 17th, stations across the country, and I've been involved with the Ken Burns film. Isn't that kind of a cool thing, you know? I think I'm one of the talking heads. I keep hearing that I am anyway. So I've given him my highest and finest advice. So, of course, it'll be an excellent series. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ken Burns and Lynn Novick.
Secretary Hagel, distinguished members of the military, Gold Star families, veterans, service members, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It is an honor to be here today on the 35th anniversary of the creation of the Wall to pay our respects to the brave men and women whose names are so beautifully inscribed here. For my co-director Lynn Novick and I, it is overwhelming to stand in this profound place, knowing that behind each of these more than 58,000 names lies an incomprehensible tragedy, an individual human being whose life was cut short by the Vietnam War, and a family that has endured immeasurable, devastating loss.
Ken and I are humbled to be here today with all of you, the keepers of the complicated story we have tried to tell. We have come to the Wall many times, especially in the past 10 years, as we've tried to make sense of the Vietnam War, one of the most consequential, divisive, and unresolved events in American history. We have searched for answers to so many questions. What really happened? Why did things go wrong? Who is to blame? Why do we avoid talking about the war? Why, 4 decades after it ended, are we unable to put Vietnam behind us? And why, long after our government reconciled with the government of our former enemy, have we not yet fully reconciled among ourselves?
Today we feel as though we have come full circle. Throughout our production, we have been inspired by Maya Lin, the designer of this remarkable work of art and memory. When she unveiled her design, Lin explained that her memorial would be a journey that would, quote, make you experience death, and where you'd have to be an observer, where you could never really fully be with the dead. It isn't something that's going to say, it's all right, it's all over, because of course it's not.
We may never be able to make the tragedy of the Vietnam War all right, but we can and we must remember the more than 58,000 soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and nurses who died in it. Today we honor their dedication, bravery, heroism, and sacrifice, and we grieve for the families. We remember the missing in action and the hundreds of thousands who were wounded. We also express our deep gratitude to the millions of men and women who served in the armed forces during the war. And we want to say to all of you what our country failed to say at the time. Thank you, and welcome home. And we want to tell all of our active duty military personnel and the veterans of our more recent wars that we did learn at least one important lesson from the Vietnam War. We will never again blame our soldiers for the policies of our leaders. Never again will we confuse the warriors with the war.
Since time immemorial, human beings have made war on each other and have suffered unspeakable losses. But for Americans, the pain of the Vietnam War has been especially deep. This bitter conflict tore our country apart, as Phil Joya, who was an officer in the 82nd Airborne, told us for our film. The Vietnam War drove a stake right into the heart of America and polarized the country as it had probably never been polarized since before the Civil War. When Mylin visited this site for the first time, she had a vision of taking a knife and cutting the ground, making a deep gash in the earth and placing the memorial there. In time, she said, the grass would grow back, the land would recover, but the memorial would remain, a reminder of what had happened. In building the wall, Jan Scruggs and the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund gave us all a place to begin a national dialogue about this divisive time and to start to heal the wounds the war inflicted.
We hope that our film can continue and deepen the conversation that began here 35 years ago. We've tried to look at this messy and tragic chapter in our history with fresh eyes and to see it from many different perspectives. It has been our great privilege to bear witness as dozens of brave men and women who lived through the war on all sides generously shared their personal stories with us. Stories of courage, comradeship, perseverance, fear, anger, doubt, conscience, grief, humanity, and love.
Carl Marlantes, who was a lieutenant in the Marines, told us about the day he and his men were pinned down under machine gun and mortar fire, trying to take a well-defended hill. He rose and started to advance, sure that he was on his own. But then he sensed movement and looked back. It was a kid from my platoon, he said, and then I looked behind him and there were more kids. The entire platoon just stood up and out they came. 40 years later, this transcendent moment remained for him just almost inexpressible of the heart that these kids had.
300 members of the West Point class of 1966 volunteered to go to Vietnam, eager to prove themselves and lead young men in combat. Many, like Matt Harrison, worried that the war might end before they got the opportunity to fight in it. But after he arrived in Vietnam in the spring of 1967, Harrison got everything he bargained for and more. He and 7 of his classmates were assigned to the 2nd Battalion, the 173rd Airborne Brigade. By the time his tour was over, 4 of his classmates had been killed and 2 others very badly wounded. Getting killed is forever, Harrison remembered. I think the hardest thing I've ever done was having to put 4 of my classmates in body bags. No 22-year-old should have to do that.
Army Captain Vincent Okamoto, who was born in a Japanese-American internment camp in World War II, also volunteered for service in Vietnam and got there in 1968. Remembering the men in his 25th Infantry Platoon, he told us, was almost enough to make him cry. 19-year-old high school dropouts from the lowest rung of American society. To see these kids who had the least to gain, they weren't going to be rewarded for their service in Vietnam. And yet, their infinite patience, their loyalty to each other, their courage under fire was just phenomenal. And you would have to ask yourself, how does America produce young men like this?
89-year-old Jean Marie Crocker of Saratoga Springs, New York, told us about her oldest son, Denton, whom the family called Moby. He was 17 when he volunteered for the Army early in the war, inspired by President Kennedy's example of service and heroism. Mogi was disappointed to be assigned a desk job in the 101st Airborne Division, but eventually he got himself transferred to a combat unit, and he was decorated for carrying a mortally wounded friend off the battlefield under fire. In his letters home, Mogi told his family nothing of what he saw or did.
His mother, Jean Marie, told us how she followed the war on television and worried whenever letters from Mogi failed to arrive. Then, on a beautiful day in 1966, she looked up and saw two men in uniform coming to the house. In an interview, she relived that unimaginable moment and told us how she implored them, "Don't say it, not my beautiful boy." But they just said yes. She gathered the other children around her and tried her best to reassure them. "We'll love each other and we'll be all right," she said. "We all tried." When her oldest daughter, Carol, asked how she could possibly still believe in God, Jean Marie told her, "Because we had Mogi. His life was a real gift. It was a privilege to have him. Our children," Jean Marie later came to believe, "are only on loan to us."
Mogi was buried at Arlington. It was many years before his sister Carol felt ready to come here to the wall. In telling that story, she helped us understand the special power of this sacred place. "When I caught sight of the wall," she said, "I literally lost my breath. Of course I wept. I saw my brother's name. I had help getting lifted up so I could touch it. I looked at his name in the company of all those other people. There was sadness, but now he wasn't alone either. He was in the company of people. He was there for people to know and to think about, and he wasn't forgotten, and he wasn't lost." Denton Crocker Jr.'s name is on panel 8E, the sixth line from the top. For Carol Crocker and for so many families and comrades of the fallen, coming to the wall was incredibly healing and freeing. "I was changed afterward," she remembered. "It is one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen."
While Mogi Crocker, Vincent Okamoto, Carl Marlantes, Matthew Harrison, and hundreds of thousands of other Americans were fighting and dying overseas, hundreds of thousands of their fellow citizens back home, including veterans of the war itself, were taking to the streets to protest a conflict many had come to believe was unjust, immoral, or simply not in our country's best interest. As anti-war activist Bill Zimmerman told us, true groups of Americans, both thinking they were acting patriotically, went to war with each other. A chasm opened in our American society. Things were said and things were done that could never be unsaid, that could never be undone. In the 50 years since, that chasm has only widened and deepened. The troubles that beset us today, alienation, resentment and cynicism, mistrust of our government and of each other, a breakdown of civil discourse and civil institutions. So many of these malevolent seeds were sown during the Vietnam War. Until we can find a way to talk, not shout, across this divide, the ghosts of the Vietnam War will continue to haunt us.
In 10 years of trying to understand the war, we have learned that there is no single truth to be extracted from this traumatic, epic tragedy. Many of the questions we asked may never be fully answered. They lead instead to deeper questions. What does it mean to be a patriot? Who was right? Who was wrong? Were the sacrifices in blood and bone too high? Could it have turned out differently? What meaning can be found in all of the suffering of the war?
If with open minds and open hearts we can listen, if we can listen to each other, perhaps we can permit more than one truth to obtain. And rather than arguing over how the war should be remembered, we can focus on the profound truths the Vietnam War can teach us about courage, about loyalty, resilience, forgiveness, and ultimately reconciliation. Thank you very much.
You truly do deserve a standing ovation. You know that more Americans get their history from Ken Burns and Glenn Novak than they do from history books. That's how popular their series are. The cinematic use of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in their series is extremely moving and just absolutely extraordinary. So those are really brilliant people, and we really appreciate your very kind remarks. You know you got to be the Grand Marshal. It's a big deal. It's not something that happens every day, Ken. So now at this time I would like to ask those who are laying wreaths today to please come forward. If everyone could give their attention to the representatives of several of our nation's leading veteran service organizations. You know, for many years they've joined our tradition of laying wreaths for the fallen on Memorial Day and for all veterans on Veterans Day, but especially those who gave their last full measure of devotion to America and the cause of freedom. The phrase last full measure of devotion was from the Gettysburg Address and used in a different way in the second inaugural by President Abraham Lincoln, who was remembered by the Lincoln Memorial. Big history buff here. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome bagpiper Chris Jackson. He will be playing Amazing Grace as bugler Staff Sergeant Jeffrey Northman from the U.S. Army plays taps. Stand if you are able as these wreaths are laid. And the wreaths are being laid by a number of, the first one is from the National Park Service, second by the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund, and the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, Vietnam Women's Memorial. Gold Star Wives of America, the American Gold Star Mothers, Military Order of the Purple Heart, Paralyzed Veterans of America, Scottish American Military Society, Disabled American Veterans, the 8 to 9 a.m. PTSD class of Washington, D.C. Veterans Administration Medical Center. Next is the Vietnam Veterans of America, followed by the 25th Infantry, 28th Infantry Regiment Association, also known as the Black Lions. They are followed by the Associates of the Vietnam Veterans of America. Third, next, 25th Infantry Division, followed by Sons and Daughters in Touch, the organization that is composed of those who lost their fathers or mothers in the Vietnam War. Next is AMVETS, the Jewish War Veterans of the United States, Veterans of Foreign Wars, the American Legion, 5th Battalion 7th Cavalry Association, Veterans, Verizon Veterans Advisory Board, the Intruder Association, Wreaths Across America, they do all the beautiful wreaths during the Christmas holidays, 3rd Squadron 4th Cavalry Association, I would ask that you please be seated and just sort of remain in your seats until the honor guard has departed. And by the way, if you haven't met the person next to you, you've been sitting next to for the last hour, why don't you shake their hand and introduce yourself? Yeah, man. Way to go. Okay, so in closing, let me encourage each and every one of you to reach out and thank and honor veterans, not only Memorial Day, but every day, because it's something we should do. So thank you all for coming, ladies and gentlemen, and that concludes our ceremony for today. Thank you.